heard of Pompeii, the ancient Roman city destroyed when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. Excavators found a library filled with papyrus scrolls.
History swore it could never be done. The Herculaneum scrolls, carbonized into brittle black logs, were a tomb for words. But in the digital dark, a new kind of fire was lit.
I think that these manuscripts are incredibly important in the context of our humanity.
Driven by an obsession that defied centuries of failure, 3 students taught a machine to see the invisible.
So now in this era of modern non-invasive imaging, we're able to start looking inside these objects without damaging them.
They have given the dead a voice, and what that voice was beginning to whisper wasn't poetry or philosophy. It was something powerful enough to rewrite history itself. The digital resurrection. For centuries, from the first accidental rediscovery of Herculaneum in 1709 and the subsequent finding of the scrolls in the 1750s, the greatest minds tried to force them to speak. Prodigious scholars and daring restorers attempted to unroll them, only to watch them crumble to dust in their hands. The scrolls became a treasure chest that no key could open, representing a maddening silence from the classical world. Then, in the autumn of 2023, the silence was broken. It was not a renowned archaeologist who made the first crack, but a young man, a computer science student, working far from the hallowed halls of classical institutions. He was an outsider, armed not with a physical scalpel, but with lines of code and artificial intelligence. While examining the first high-resolution scans of a scroll's interior, his trained algorithm detected a pattern where the human eye saw only void. From a digital landscape of ash and shadow, a shape emerged. It was a word, a single, solitary word, the first to be read from this cursed library since the reign of the Roman emperors. After a lifetime of silence, the scroll had whispered its first secret. The word was porphyrus. It meant purple. In the ancient world, this was not merely a color. It was a symbol of immense power, of almost unimaginable wealth. Purple dye was worth more than its weight in gold, painstakingly extracted in minute quantities from the glands of the murex sea snail. To wear purple was to be cloaked in empire. It was the exclusive mark of Roman senators and emperors. This single word, therefore, was not a mundane fragment. It was a key that unlocked a world of specific, tangible imagery, such as the imperial court, the vast networks of Mediterranean trade, and the staggering luxury of the elite. For the feat of being the first person in 2,000 years to read a word from the heart of the volcano, the young man was awarded a prize of $40,000. It was a monumental sum for a single word, a testament to the sheer weight of its meaning. But why was this word worth so much? And if one word could be found, then there were sentences to be read. And if there were sentences, then there were entire philosophies, lost poems, and forgotten histories waiting in the darkness. What other discoveries came into reality that left historians shocked? What profound truths, buried for ages, began to emerge from the carbonized depths, ready to rewrite everything we thought we knew about our own past? The Library of the Damned? To understand the worth of this scroll, one needs to understand its history, especially why it took so long to be unearthed. The sun rose on a late summer morning in the year 79 AD, illuminating a landscape of unparalleled prosperity along the Bay of Naples. The mountain that dominated the horizon, Vesuvius, was not feared for its size, but rather appreciated for its fertility. On its slopes were thriving vineyards and beautiful villas, and at its feet, the bustling commercial hub of Pompeii and the elegant seaside retreat of Herculaneum nestled. Rich Romans visited these cities for commerce, relaxation, and the exquisite art. Yet, they had no idea that something terrible was brewing. They weren't completely oblivious. At least they knew the mountain was a volcano that had once spewed lava across the land they called home. But that happened centuries ago, over 300 years BC, and ever since the volcano had slept. None of them were alive when the eruption occurred, and all they knew were stories. so the entire civilization felt a sense of security. They couldn't have been more wrong. Experts believe it was around 1 in the afternoon on the 24th of August that the slumber ended. With a cataclysmic roar that shattered the afternoon calm, the mountain exploded, tearing its own peak asunder and hurling a monstrous dark column of pumice, ash, and superheated gas miles into the stratosphere. The world, for the thousands living in its shadow, had just turned inside out. The only surviving eyewitness account comes from a terrified teenager, Pliny the Younger, watching from the safety of Misenum across the bay. In letters to the historian Tacitus, he described a terrifying mushroom-shaped cloud resembling a stone pine tree, a phenomenon so distinctive that we now call such events Plinian eruptions. He wrote of day turning to night, of a relentless, suffocating hail of pumice stones that piled up like snow, trapping people in their homes and collapsing roofs under their weight. But his story didn't end there. He became a victim and told a heroic tale of his uncle, Pliny the Elder. As commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, the elder Pliny was a man of science and action. Upon seeing the eruption, he ordered his galleys to cross the bay not in flight, but in a daring attempt to rescue citizens stranded along the coast. Sadly, by the time he reached Stabiae, he was overcome by toxic fumes. His body was found days later, a scholar and admiral felled by the very natural phenomenon he had sought to study. The destruction was not a single event, but a methodical, multi-phase annihilation. The initial fallout of pumice and ash primarily targeted Pompeii, burying it under meters of lightweight rock and causing deaths mainly through structural collapse and asphyxiation. But for Herculaneum, the end came more swiftly and terribly. In the early hours of August 25th, the eruption column collapsed, sending the first of several pyroclastic surges, a wave of incandescent gas, ash, and rock, heated to nearly 500 degrees Celsius and traveling at hurricane speeds, racing down the mountain. It instantly vaporized every living thing in Herculaneum. The searing heat carbonized organic material, including wood, food, and, most significantly, a vast library of papyrus scrolls, turning them to charcoal in an instant. Subsequent surges and flows buried the city under 20 meters of hardened, rock-like tuff, sealing it in an airtight, deep-freeze tomb. While Pompeii was entombed in a lighter, more accessible ash, Herculaneum was encased in a concrete-like shell, a fact that would dramatically alter the course of its rediscovery. For nearly 17 centuries, the cities slept, their names fading from memory into local legend. The rediscovery of Pompeii began more systematically in 1748, and its dramatic unearthing, complete with haunting plaster casts of its victims, captured the world's imagination. But what of Herculaneum? Its story of rediscovery is one of sheer chance and treasure-hunting ambition. In 1709, a farmer digging a well stumbled upon magnificent pieces of marble, which turned out to be from the seats of Herculaneum's long-buried theater. This alert eventually reached Prince d'Elbeuf, an Austrian cavalry officer who, in a quest to adorn his nearby villa, began tunneling into the ruins and pillaged statues from the theater with no regard for their context. It was a crude and destructive start, but eventually it was worth it, revealing that another city lay hidden, one preserved in even greater detail than its famous neighbor. The true magnitude of what lay beneath was revealed in 1750, when workers, following these early tunnels, broke into a sumptuous seaside villa. They found a building of unparalleled grandeur, believed to have belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. But within a small room, they made a discovery that would eclipse all the statues and mosaics. It was a library, not of parchment or wax tablets, but of hundreds of scrolls stacked on shelves in a Roman bibliotheca. They were carbonized, blackened, and fragile, resembling lumps of charcoal more than books. In the intense heat of the pyroclastic surge, they had been burned yet preserved, their words locked inside a brittle carbon shell. This was the Villa of the Papyri, and its contents represented the only surviving library from the ancient world. The initial attempts to open them were disastrous. Some were simply shattered to dust, while early unrolling machines, though sometimes successful, often destroyed the very texts they sought to reveal. Specialists began to give up, except one man. Who was he, and what did he do to unravel the secrets of the Herculaneum scrolls? The prophet of digital unwrapping. In the hushed world of classical studies, where progress is measured in decades and discoveries in millimeters, the Herculaneum scrolls were the ultimate locked-room mystery. But what if the key to unlocking them wasn't a finer scalpel, but an entirely new kind of vision? This is the story of the one man who refused to accept their silence, a computer scientist who embarked on a decades-long quixotic quest to teach a machine to see what the human eye could not. His name is Dr. Brent Seals, and he became a powerful master of digital unwrapping. The journey began not in Italy, but in the desert. For years, Seals had been developing algorithms to unwrap delicate manuscripts virtually, but the real test came with the En-Gedi scroll. Discovered in Israel, it was a carbonized lump of ash, utterly destroyed by a 6th century fire. To any traditional archaeologist, it was a total loss, an object of pure despair. But Seals and his team saw a different reality. They used high-resolution X-ray microcomputed tomography to scan the scroll's interior in 3 dimensions, creating a digital replica. Then they deployed their groundbreaking virtual unwrapping software, a complex algorithm that could digitally flatten the scroll's rolled-up layers without ever touching it. The moment of truth was electric. From a formless, charred log, Hebrew script began to emerge, clear and readable. It was the Book of Leviticus. The En-Gedi scroll was not just a success, it was a miracle. It proved unequivocally that a text could be read from within without it ever being opened. The theoretical foundation for others was laid. But Herculaneum, Seals knew, was a far more formidable adversary. The problem was the ink. The En-Gedi scroll used ink with metallic elements, making it visible to X-rays. The Herculaneum scrolls, however, were written with carbon-based ink, soot or charcoal mixed with water or oil. As one expert grimly noted, this was the core of the dilemma. The scrolls were carbonized papyrus, and the ink was pure carbon. It was like trying to detect a shadow cast on a pitch-black wall. For all the power of his virtual unwrapping algorithm, Seals faced a devastating truth. He could map the intricate, crumpled topography of a scroll's surface with breathtaking precision. He could digitally flatten it into a pristine virtual page. But the page would be blank. The very event that preserved the scrolls, their carbonization, had rendered them invisible to the tools he had so painstakingly built. He had solved the problem of the structure, but not the substance. What followed was a long, lonely struggle fought in university labs and grant application committees. Seals became a man possessed, juggling the roles of computer scientist, historian, and fundraiser. He was a visionary speaking a language of algorithms and pixels to classicists who dealt in philology and papyrology, while also trying to convince his peers in computer science that the most compelling challenge for their field lay in a 2,000-year-old pile of ash. The skepticism was a constant wall. Could this digital dream ever deliver tangible results? Was he chasing a phantom? He built a small, dedicated team laboring for years, driven by a conviction that bordered on obsession. They knew the text was there, physically embedded in the papyrus. They just had to find a way to make it appear. After another round of intensive scanning and processing, the screen still displayed a perfectly unwrapped, impossibly detailed but utterly empty scroll. Yet from this nadir, a new idea began to form. If the ink couldn't be seen directly, perhaps its presence could be detected indirectly through the subtlest of clues. Minute changes in the papyrus texture, infinitesimal bumps and cracks left by the ancient scribe's pen. This was a problem of pattern recognition at the atomic scale, a task ideally suited to machine learning. But training such a system required a monumental amount of data and processing power far beyond the resources of a single academic lab. And so Dr. Seals made a fateful decision. He would take his lifetime's work, his unsolved puzzle, and his collection of blank, unwrapped scrolls, and he would pose the problem to the world. "We can now virtually unroll the scrolls," he announced. "But the pages are blank. How do we make the ink appear?" The AI and the synchrotron. To any conventional imaging tool, even a high-powered medical CT scanner, the scrolls appeared as homogeneous, featureless lumps. The text was physically present, but it had no more visual contrast than a shadow cast on a black wall. The question that came to define the quest was no longer about unwrapping, but about perception itself. How do you teach a machine to see what is fundamentally invisible? The answer would require not one, but two technological miracles, born from the marriage of atomic-level physics and sophisticated artificial intelligence. The first miracle was the synchrotron. To call it a sophisticated X-ray machine is to call a hurricane a breeze. A synchrotron is a particle accelerator, a colossal circular structure where electrons are fired to nearly the speed of light, racing through a vacuum tube maintained by powerful superconducting magnets. As these electrons are bent around the ring, they throw off an intense, focused beam of light, a brilliance millions of times brighter than the sun, spanning the spectrum from infrared to high-energy X-rays. This was the only light powerful enough to illuminate the invisible text within the scrolls. But the key was not just the beam's intensity, but its application. Researchers turned to a technique known as X-ray phase contrast imaging. Traditional X-rays measure how much of the beam a material blocks, and for carbon-on-carbon, absorption is virtually identical. Phase contrast imaging, however, is exquisitely sensitive to how the X-rays are subtly delayed and refracted as they pass through different materials. It doesn't just see density, it considers the fine-grained texture and internal topography of an object. Imagine it as the difference between looking at a smooth black stone and running your fingers over its surface. Your eyes see nothing, but your fingertips detect minute scratches and ridges. The synchrotron's beam performed this same feat at a microscopic level, capturing three-dimensional maps of the papyrus with such incredible resolution that the faint physical imprint of the ink, the way it settled into the plant fibers and created a tiny topographical signature, could theoretically be detected. Yet, this data was not a simple photograph. The output was a terabyte-sized digital universe of voxels, three-dimensional pixels, each containing information about the papyrus structure at that specific point. To the human eye, these scans were still a chaotic jungle of crushed fiber and volcanic debris. The text remained hidden in plain sight. This is where the second miracle, artificial intelligence, entered the stage. The challenge was to create a digital scribe that could read this alien landscape. The solution was to train a machine learning model, specifically a deep neural network, to become an expert papyrologist of the invisible. But how do you train an AI to find something that has never been seen? The breakthrough came from a clever and painstaking process of creating a Rosetta Stone. Researchers took a few precious, open fragments of the Herculaneum papyri that showed visible ink. These fragments were first scanned with the synchrotron, yielding a high-resolution three-dimensional map of their microscopic topography. For the AI, this dataset consisted of answered flashcards. It could analyze the complex data from a section of papyrus where a letter A was visible, and learn the unique physical feel of that inked region. It was understood that the specific combination of fiber density, surface height, and texture in a given area correlated perfectly with the presence of ancient carbon ink. This training process was a form of digital reinforcement. The AI was fed millions of these data points, iteratively adjusting its internal parameters, learning to distinguish the signal of ink from the noise of papyrus. It wasn't looking for a color or a shade, it was learning a texture. It was being taught to recognize the scribe's hand, the infinitesimal ridge left by a reed pen dipped in carbon black ink, pressed onto a sheet of papyrus 2 millennia ago. Once the neural network was thoroughly trained on these fragments, it had built its own internal model of what ink looked like in this strange three-dimensional space. It was then ready for its ultimate test. The team could now feed the AI the scans of a completely unopened, tightly rolled scroll. The algorithm would systematically analyze every microscopic voxel of the internal structure, flagging any region that possessed the distinct topographical signature it had learned to associate with ink. It was, in effect, painting the text back into existence, not with light, but with data. This two-part technological miracle completed the digital pipeline. The Herculean task had been solved. The scrolls could be virtually unwrapped, and now, for the first time, the ink could be made to appear. The tool was built, but who would now wield it to make the first significant discovery? The Scroll Hunter's Gambit. In 2023, something remarkable happened. A diverse coalition of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, tech enthusiasts, and students launched an audacious attempt to succeed where traditional methods had stalled. Their weapon of choice? Artificial intelligence? Their strategy? A worldwide competition that would democratize the process of discovery. The question hanging in the air was profound yet straightforward. Could a global community of outsiders accomplish what specialists had failed to do in 275 years? The Vesuvius challenge emerged from an intriguing convergence of worlds, the ancient and the ultra-modern. Spearheaded by tech investors like Nat Friedman and researchers including Dr. Brent Seals from the University of Kentucky, the competition represented a radical approach to archaeological problem-solving. The premise was deceptively simple: offer substantial cash prizes, eventually totaling $1.5 million, to anyone who could develop methods to virtually unwrap the scrolls and detect the elusive ink within them. The Vesuvius challenge quickly evolved into a vibrant digital ecosystem, with participants congregating on forums and messaging platforms to share insights, frustrations, and incremental progress. This wasn't a solitary image of traditional scholarship. It was a dynamic global brainstorming session unfolding in real time. The competition structure encouraged both collaboration and healthy rivalry. Participants shared code and techniques while still vying for the grand prize. The digital forums buzzed with activity as competitors from diverse backgrounds tackled different aspects of the problem. Some focused on virtual unwrapping algorithms to flatten the rolled layers, others on ink detection methods to identify faint traces of writing, and still others on geometric reconstruction to map the damaged surfaces. What united them was a shared sense of possibility and the thrill of potentially solving a mystery that had defied centuries of conventional approaches. Among the thousands of participants worldwide, certain personalities began to emerge. Luke Ferreter, a 21-year-old computer science major and Thiel Fellow from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, found himself drawn to the challenge while working as an intern at SpaceX. Listening to a podcast interview about the scrolls during his commute, he became captivated by the technical puzzle. His approach was characteristically hands-on. He even created his own test scrolls by purchasing papyrus from Amazon and charring it in his father's robotics company oven to understand better the material properties he was working with. Meanwhile, other competitors like Youssef Nader in Germany and Julian Schilliger in Switzerland brought their own specialized expertise to the challenge, each contributing pieces to what would eventually become a collective breakthrough. As the competition progressed through 2023, the digital forums became a theater of shared suspense. Participants worked against the clock, knowing that the grand prize required reading at least 4 passages of 140 characters each from a Herculaneum scroll by the year's end. The tension was palpable in both the digital spaces where competitors collaborated and the private moments of determination. The breakthrough came not as a single eureka moment, but as a series of incremental discoveries shared across the community. The critical first step was the identification of a crackle pattern, faint textures and discolorations in the 3-dimensional scans that corresponded to where ink had been placed millennia ago. Machine learning models were trained to recognize these subtle patterns, gradually improving their accuracy through countless iterations. Then came the electrifying moment when the first complete word emerged from the digital void, porphyros, meaning purple. This was the proof of concept the community needed, evidence that their methods could actually recover readable text from the seemingly blank scans. The race intensified as the deadline approached, with competitors refining their models and comparing results in a collaborative sprint toward the finish line. In the end, it was a team effort that claimed the $700,000 grand prize. Luc Ferreter, Youssef Nader, and Julian Schilliger, a transcontinental trio who had combined their expertise, were announced as the winners in late 2023. Their achievement was staggering. They had successfully read over 2,000 Greek letters from one of the scrolls, far exceeding the competition's requirements. The validation process was a moment of high drama, as classical scholars, including Professor Richard Janko, examined the results to confirm their authenticity. The winning submission represented more than just technical prowess. It demonstrated the power of collaborative problem-solving across traditional boundaries. The victory proved that the crowdsourced competitive model could indeed succeed where more traditional academic approaches had progressed slowly, not because of a lack of expertise or dedication, but simply because the problem required a different approach. The scroll the winners had successfully decoded turned out to be a work by the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus of Gadara, who lived from approximately 110 to 30 BCE. Philodemus had studied in Athens under Zeno of Sidon before moving to Italy, where he became part of a circle of Epicurean philosophers that included several Roman poets. The specific text they had uncovered was On Pleasure, a philosophical exploration of the nature and sources of enjoyment. This was no dry treatise. The decoded passages revealed a vibrant, engaging philosophical discussion that explored whether pleasurable experiences arose from the abundant or the scarce, from the minor or the major constituents of an experience, such as a meal. The author, Philodemus, was known for his elegant and witty poetry. Cicero himself had praised his literary style, and his philosophical works demonstrated a nuanced understanding of Epicurean principles. The significance of this discovery extended far beyond simply identifying the author. It confirmed that the Herculaneum library contained substantive philosophical works from the Epicurean school, offering potential new insights into an intellectual tradition that emphasized pleasure as the absence of pain and fear. The scroll revealed Philodemus as more than just a philosopher. He was a compelling writer who could weave complex ideas into engaging prose. And as the initial excitement over reading the first scroll settled, a deeper question emerged. This philosophical debate was significant to scholars, but was it historically revolutionary? The Philosopher's War. Of all the treasures sealed within the Villa of the Papyri by Vesuvius's pyroclastic flow, the first to be decoded did not offer some sort of wisdom or serene poetry. Instead, they unleashed a battle cry. As virtual light began to illuminate the carbonized scrolls, scholars did not simply find the collected works of the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus. They stumbled upon an ancient, fiercely contested intellectual battlefield. Imagine the scene not as a silent library, but as a vibrant symposium or a heated lecture hall. Philodemus, a Greek philosopher from Gadara, was no recluse. He was a teacher embedded with the Roman elite in Herculaneum, a propagandist for his Epicurean school in a world teeming with rival ideologies. His most formidable opponents were the Stoics, followers of Zeno and Chrysippus, who presented a starkly different vision of the good life. The newly decoded scrolls, which focus intently on the philosophy of pleasure, reveal this conflict in stunning detail. This was not an abstract discussion. Experts who have analyzed the text describe it as a direct and relentless assault. Philodemus doesn't just outline his own Epicurean views. He strategically quotes his Stoic rivals, line by line, specifically to dismantle their arguments. The scrolls thus become a record of a duel, preserving the very words of the opposition solely for their destruction. At the heart of this philosopher's war was a fundamental clash over the nature of pleasure. For the Epicureans, pleasure was the absence of pain and fear, a state of serene tranquility known as ataraxia. It was the ultimate goal, achievable through modest living, knowledge, and friendship. But the Stoics saw the world through a different lens. For them, virtue derived solely from living in accordance with reason and nature was the only true good. Pleasure, along with pain and wealth, was merely an indifferent something that could be used well or poorly, but which had no inherent moral value. A good Stoic would pursue virtue regardless of pain or pleasure. This is the argument that Philodemus attacks with such vigor. He quotes Stoic texts, likely from the prolific Chrysippus himself, who argued that pleasure was not the telos or end goal of life. Philodemus then masterfully dissects these claims, defending the Epicurean position that a life free from physical and mental anguish is the most rational and achievable form of happiness. This dynamic transforms our understanding of the library's value. Experts say the most thrilling aspect of this discovery is not just the recovery of Philodemus's own thoughts, but the miraculous preservation of his opponent's voices. The Stoic philosopher Chrysippus was one of the most prolific writers of antiquity, said to have written over 700 works. Yet not a single one survives in its complete form. His influence was immense, shaping Roman law and thought for centuries, but his actual words were lost, known only through second-hand summaries and fragments. Now, within the refutations of his enemy, Chrysippus speaks again. Philodemus's scrolls have become an unintended ark, carrying fragments of the very philosophy he sought to sink. This means the library is not a monologue, it is a unique, multi-voiced dialogue. It captures the sound of ancient philosophy and practice, not as a settled dogma, but as a fierce, living debate where ideas clashed, evolved, and were defended with rhetorical force. Consequently, the villa itself is reimagined. It was not merely a retreat for private study, but must have been a hotbed of intellectual activity. One can envision Philodemus here debating Stoic contemporaries, refining his arguments for his Roman patrons, and carefully composing these very scrolls as weapons in a war of worldviews. Therefore, the successful decoding of these first scrolls does more than just settle an ancient score between two philosophical schools. It dramatically raises the stakes for every unread scroll that remains. If the works of Philodemus contain these priceless verbatim quotes from the lost Chrysippus, what other treasures are waiting? What other lost voices are trapped in the carbonized layers of the next scroll? Plato's grave and the unwritten classic. For centuries, the narrative of classical antiquity has been a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. A story told through fragmented quotations in later works and the frustrating summaries of what once was. But what if a single discovery could shatter that silence? What if we could hear, across the vast gulf of time, the very breath of a giant? The most dramatic revelation from the carbonized scrolls of Herculaneum is precisely that, an intimate biographical account that pulls back the curtain on Plato's death, transforming him from a marble statue of a philosopher into a flesh-and-blood man in his final hours. Though weak with fever, Plato listened as a Thracian slave girl played the flute. With his last strength, he criticized her performance, noting her poor rhythm. This was not a random comment from a dying man. It was a final, defiant act of criticism from a thinker who had spent his life arguing about music's power and its dangers. This detail is significant because Plato was famously suspicious of the flute. In his Republic, he argued that specific musical modes and instruments could weaken a person's spirit and disrupt the order of the soul. The flute, or aulos, was particularly problematic. Its wild emotional sound was associated with Dionysian frenzy and was considered by Plato to be a threat to the rational self-control he valued above all. For the great philosopher, the Thracian girl's music represented the very kind of undisciplined art he believed should have no place in a well-ordered society. His final critique was a powerful echo of his lifelong philosophy. Furthermore, the scroll provides archaeologists with a tangible, earth-shattering clue. It specifies that Plato was buried in a private garden within the Academy's grounds, near a sacred shrine to the Muses. This precise location, lost for millennia, is no longer a mystery but a potential site for future excavation, a direct coordinate to the physical remains of a foundational pillar of Western thought. With the precedent of Plato's biography firmly established, the mind reels at the catalogue of possibilities that the unread scrolls almost certainly contain. What else might be waiting patiently in those carbonized cylinders? The answer promises a revolution across every facet of ancient knowledge. For lost epic poetry, the ultimate prize would be the complete works of Sappho, whose existing fragments hint at a voice of such power and personal emotion that their recovery would fundamentally alter our understanding of Greek lyricism. The library could hold the missing books of Livy's monumental history of Rome, filling the gaps in our chronicle of the Republic's rise, or even an eyewitness account of Alexander the Great's campaigns, stripping away the legend to reveal the man and his strategies. Imagine recovering the complete tragedies of Aeschylus or Sophocles, plays that were celebrated in their time but vanished in the subsequent centuries, their power known only by title and reputation. And what of scientific thought? The complete writings of Archimedes, whose genius in mathematics and engineering is still only partially understood, could be concealed within the villa. Even more tantalizing is the possibility of recovering the works of Democritus, the father of atomism, whose theory that the universe is composed of tiny, indivisible particles was a stunning premonition of modern physics. His ideas survive only in criticism and paraphrase. To read his own words would be to connect directly with one of the most prescient minds of antiquity. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.